Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Happy Monday. Thank you for joining. Was off sort of last week just because recovering from vacation, how that always goes. But I'm back. New guest with me. I have Kelsie joining me this week. She's career coach, gonna dive into some questions because there's always a lot of questions. I'm sure Kelsie, you know better than I do of what questions you get when people say, "Hey, what is a career coach?" But thank you for taking some time out of your day, out of your week to join me on the show here and talk about what you do.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I am excited to be here and excited to really dive deep into career coaching and the mission of Educated Exit.
Awesome, awesome. So let's jump in with that because I think a lot of people see, they'll get messages or they'll see people talking about what they do as a career coach, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions around that just because, a lot of different coaches offer different services, so there's never really like that one size fits all type of approach. So,
Mhm.
for you as a career coach, what are some of the common things that you get questions that you deal with when candidates are first coming to you saying, "Hi, Kelsie, I think I'd like to kind of utilize your services."
Yeah, so I do want to make it clear that Educated Exit was founded on the mission of working specifically with educators to help them advance their career. So we work with everyone from paraprofessionals, librarians, school psychologists, teachers, school counselors, preschool teachers, preschool directors. We work with educators across the board, and we also work with formally or newly transitioned educators as well, who may be kind of in their first job post-education, and really not sure what's next. From there, our career coaching practice is really based on a values-centered model. We do all of our career coaching one-to-one, so there's never a big group. Everything is confidential, and our goal is to really help you find your path through what we call career clarity. And everything is centered around that career clarity. So your resume, your LinkedIn, um, all of the services that we provide flow from that moment of career clarity that we help you establish.
Awesome. So I know you were in education prior to this. So how important was that for you to kind of make that part of what you were going to do as your career progressed? Because I know that you don't necessarily have to be a former educator to help coach transitioning teachers into something new, but it certainly helps. So, how did you try to utilize that experience and your background to now help others as they look to do the same?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this a lot on LinkedIn. I did not have support when I left education. My career trajectory went from preschool teacher to school counselor, and then eventually I left education and went and worked in ed tech. And one thing that I'm always very open and honest about is I left education the wrong way, and I have the utmost respect for the company that I worked for, the people that I worked for, the job that I was doing. Um, but when it came down to it, I truly felt like I did not make the right decision and I did not say yes to the right job. And so that's why I'm so passionate now about helping educators leave, because I understand what happens when you don't have that career clarity and how hard that can actually be on you as a whole and your career trajectory.
Definitely, definitely. And I mean, going with a career coach, that's a two-sided relationship, right? You need to make sure you're going to be the right coach for them as well as them being the right client that can utilize your services. So, kind of walk me through that process from that initial outreach. When candidates come to you and say that they're interested in your services, what are some of the steps that you take initially to ensure that you're going to be able to provide the support that they need as well as and to give them those realistic expectations about what you're going to be able to provide for them.
Yeah, so I will start by saying that about 70% of all of our clients come to us after unsuccessfully working with another career coach.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean there's not other good career coaches out there, but specifically for educators who are looking to leave the profession, the vast majority of our clients come to us after working with someone else and not being happy with their results.
Sure.
That said, we do let them know, like, pay if you want to go into our one-on-one career coaching program. It's a financial commitment, it's a time commitment. You're going to have homework, you're going to have meetings. It's a all-encompassing program, but we have a very high success rate. So you have to be willing to put in the work if we are going to put in the work to help you.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So I get a lot of messages from people looking to move from the classroom. I usually preface my responses that I'm not a coach, I'm not a resume writer. I'm in talent acquisition, so I look at resumes all day for sure. But I'm not going to try to tell someone that I can revamp a resume. But I know that's a lot of the initial consultation that a lot of people going with a coach. That's kind of the starting point, right? Is that resume? Because admittedly, my resume now versus what it was when I was in the classroom is night and day difference. So,
Mhm, mhm.
what are some of those common fixes, common errors that you're seeing when you do the initial review that are kind of the easy fixes that someone who's starting off their job search might not be aware of going from the classroom to now try to find something more in the corporate setting or elsewhere?
So I do just want to say that the process of leaving education is very distinct.
Mhm.
There are very specific phases that every educator needs to go through in order to make the transition successful.
Yeah.
There's about 4 phases, depending on kind of where you're at mentally and um, what you think you want to do after education. That said, when we meet with people, we tell everyone that regardless of where you're at in the process, your resume is not the first step in leaving education.
Right.
Career clarity is. And if you have career clarity, all of the information on your resume, your cover letter, your LinkedIn, if you need a portfolio, that it includes that as well. All of that flows much more cohesively instead of just the corporate jargon AI word salad that many people are trying to put together when they go to leave education.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a great point and probably one that's often overlooked because you get to that point where you want to make the change and I know there's a lot of candidates that still are going through the spray and pray method. So obviously that clarity is gonna be an important step and one that, like you mentioned, is important and sometimes overlooked. So with that said, I think some of the main questions I get is how do I highlight the skills that I have from the classroom and kind of show how they can be applicable to a new role? The transferable skills aspect is
Mhm, mhm.
the common struggle, I would say, especially when identifying where they can update their resume as well as what they can do. So, what are some of the skills developed in the classroom that you'll typically have them highlight? And you can make this specific to the field that they're trying to enter because it's obviously going to be very different if they're trying to go into ed tech versus something else.
Yeah. So, um, before we ever dive into a client's resume, we ask them 3 basic questions. What problems are you qualified to solve and why? Why does that matter to an employer? And what does the employer have to gain by hiring you specifically?
Hmm.
And so if you can answer those 3 questions and you can have very clear and articulate answers to those questions, your transferable skills become much easier to identify. And so if you're someone who's looking to go into instructional design and you're wanting to work at a large corporation versus maybe a smaller organization, you need to have an understanding of how your teacher skills in curriculum development, curriculum presentation, um, curriculum evaluation, all of that applies to that large corporate setting. But you also need to have an understanding of if you're going to also apply to those smaller organizations or those small businesses, how specifically those skills translate to small businesses as well.
Yeah, definitely. So beyond that, I mean, I think a lot of the biggest things that the transitioning educators need support with is the interview preparation as well, because preparing for an interview when you're going for a classroom position is a whole different animal than the interview processes they are now. There's some similarities for sure, but for the most part, there's going to be a lot of
Mhm,
differences that they may not be, fully
mhm.
expecting. So, when talking interview prep with your candidates, what's some of that evergreen advice that you give to those who've kind of made it beyond the application process and now are finally getting that face-to-face time to speak with the recruiter and the hiring managers to feel comfortable in that process?
So one thing that I tell everyone, and this applies to every person in every position, regardless of where you're job searching. When you show up for an interview, you need to show up as your most professional self.
Mhm.
And that means you're going to send a thank you card after the interview. That means you're going to have fully prepared answers to the best of your ability for that interview. So you've studied on the company, you've studied on the position, you understand your transferable skills. You are going to present to them basically an ironclad argument as to why you are the best candidate. And you're going to do that in a professional way that shows not only that recruiter, but that hiring manager and the entire organization that you can come in and solve problems and be a contributor who generates revenue. Because at the end of the day, companies want their problem solved and they want revenue.
Mhm. Definitely. Definitely. So obviously, LinkedIn right now is a good place to start, finding those opportunities and building your network. And I think this is another thing that, can kind of seem like an overwhelming part of the process is that networking. Because admittedly, I didn't use LinkedIn at all when I was in the classroom. So when it came time to start, it was kind of like a few years of trial and error for myself.
Mhm.
And you've built quite a network on the platform yourself. So how do you try to coach your clients to be strategic with how they build their network? Who they should aim to connect with, not just specifically on LinkedIn, but other job searching tools, and how they can kind of create more organic relationships in their network and not just try to connect with any and everyone as they go through.
Yeah, you mentioned something very interesting, and that is connecting with everyone and anyone.
Mhm.
Um, and I see that as really such a big mental hurdle for a lot of educators because oftentimes they get in this mindset, well, you just never know. You never know who somebody else knows. And that is something that um, is a little outdated, especially with the use of LinkedIn, and with so much professional networking happening online. Because now you have the resources to go out and connect specifically with people who hold the job in which you want to hold. And so if you're just adding everyone and everyone for the sake of adding people, you're you're doing busy work, and it's busy work that's not going to it's likely not going to make an impact in the way you think it is. And so getting really clear on who you should be connecting with, why you're connecting with them, understanding how to build professional conversation, and understanding how to ask professional questions in a way that is not asking for favors or asking for handouts from strangers
Mhm.
is going to be a really important thing
Yeah.
as you move through the process, because not only do you need that in order to leave education, but what I tell all my clients is that likely your first job out of education is not going to be your last job. So
Yeah.
the job searching skills that you need to learn in order to leave education are also going to be the job searching skills that you take with you for the rest of your career.
Yeah, and that's honestly advice I wish I'd had when I made the move. Because I mean, when you're in education, sometimes you enter and you say, I'm going to be a classroom teacher for 30 years. So there's not necessarily that mindset of what's next, where do I go from here? And I think that's an
Mhm.
important one to break, certainly, and one that a message I could have used myself early on. So I love to hear that you do that with your clients now. And this next question is one that I've asked a few different career coaches that I've had on the show before, just because we're in kind of that era of instant gratification, and people want to see results right away, right? And you have to temper those
Mhm.
expectations when working with a client, because right now the market is insane. It's not like you're gonna apply for a job and in 30 days you've got it. Ideally, that would be the case, but
Yeah.
that's kind of a long drawn out process for some, unfortunately. And especially with educators where they've kind of will sometimes put those deadlines on themselves. Like if I don't have a job by this date, I have to renew my contract. So when you're
Mhm.
working with people trying to make that move, how do try to combat those self-imposed deadlines, especially now, a lot of schools are out already or will be soon. So, this is kind of crunch time for a lot that are looking to make the move. So how do you try to make sure they're not trying to rush through and find a job at all costs and maybe not end up in the right situation for themselves just because they want to make the change?
Yeah, I think that everyone has a very unique situation, and it's always so hard when I come on these podcasts because um we work with educators one-on-one. And so we always try to give every client the most tailored job search approach to their needs, their situation, um, and make sure that both Chris McLean, our CEO, and I are on the same page in the best way to serve our clients.
Mhm.
And um, right now, with the job market being tight and so many educators out on summer break, teachers are facing kind of this double-edged sword where they feel like, should I leave or should I attempt to leave? Should I job search or should I just go back to the classroom? And one thing that I have told educators for forever, it feels like, is that regardless of what the job market is doing, it takes an average of 3 to 6 months to leave education. And so that process is it can be messy, it can be emotional, it's hard work. It's not something that you can just tackle on a Saturday morning and expect to be in a new job in 60 days.
Yeah,
Like no matter what the job market is doing, this is a process that takes thinking and planning and strategy. And so educators really need to understand that whenever they decide to leave, whether that's this summer, next summer, a year from now, whatever it may be, uh, that requires planning. It requires thought. It requires, resources in place. It requires a lot of things. And so before you just jump in and start applying for jobs, you need to be able to kind of have that heart to heart with yourself and understand, like, I am going to commit to this process for X number of months to leave education and I'm going to see it through. And some people are very successful with keeping that commitment to themselves. And others get upset and um, get discouraged. But you have to understand that everyone faces job rejection. Like that is a normal part of career growth, being rejected from a job. And so having that commitment to yourself and being able to keep your promise to yourself is equally as important as understanding when it's time to leave, the resources to help you leave education, and planning your exit from beginning to end.
definitely. Definitely. Yeah, that's such sound advice. And I know at times it's not always the easiest to hear for some candidates just because, they're ready to make the move and the market's, unfortunately not going to move as quickly as they'd like. So having that patience and not getting frustrated is so important because then, that ultimately will lead you to likely a scenario that you don't want to be in down the road. So,
Mhm.
last question I have for you is one that I ask everyone who joins me on the podcast. I want to preface it a little different since you mentioned initially that you left education the wrong way. So, looking back to that Kelsie, what is that piece of advice that you would give past Kelsie now that you wish you had known when you first entered the job search to find something new out of education?
Oh gosh, there's so many things I would tell myself. I know hindsight is 2020, but looking at where I was mentally when I wanted to leave school counseling to where I am now in terms of just who I am as a person, how I've grown in business and entrepreneurship and all of those things. I would say like the biggest piece of advice that I would give myself is invest in yourself because at the end of the day, you are responsible for you. Like there will never be anyone else who wants you to succeed more than you. And so if you can invest in your own future, that is huge.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So before I let you go, Kelsie, I know people can find you on LinkedIn, but always like to give the time, plug your company, where they can find you, how they can connect with you, and if they want to utilize your services, what are the best steps to take to get in contact with you on that end?
Absolutely. So you can find us at educatedexit.com and you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm just Kelsie Marks on LinkedIn. I'm on TikTok as Kelsie Marks. I discuss a lot of issues in education as well as issues leaving education and the job market. And then you can connect with Educated Exit on Instagram, where we do share several free resources and just a variety of thought-provoking conversations there.
Awesome. Well, again, Kelsie, thank you for taking some time out of your week to jump on here with me. If you're not following Connected with Kelsie, make sure you're doing that. And uh, look forward to hearing some feedback on the episode. Thank you for watching, listening, however you consume this episode. We will see you next Monday.